Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Donald Hall, Provost and Executive Vice President here at Binghamton, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this really special event. I'm also pleased to thank and welcome Charles Scheidt, representing the Charles E. Scheidt Family Foundation. In early 2017, Binghamton University was able to announce the establishment of the Interdisciplinary Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, thanks to the transformational support of the Scheidt Family Foundation and facilitated by Binghamton University alumnus Owen Pell, class of '80. IGMAP's focus from its inception was to be on how to use scholarship in the social sciences and humanities to prevent genocide and other mass atrocities with a broad understanding of prevention. This includes identifying where a genocide is likely to take place and taking actions to stop it. But it also involves responding to past harms to make sure that cycles of violence come to an end. Central to IGMAP's work has been a focus on collaborating with non-governmental organizations and governments to address histories of violence and stop horrific things from happening through better predicting and preventing the patterns that result in genocide and mass atrocity crimes. The Institute has lived that mission and has a growing national and world reputation for it. And Binghamton University has been fertile ground for that work. To my mind, IGMAP represents best what is truly distinctive about this university: its deep and enduring commitment to social justice and human rights in all of its interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary forms. It is what excites me most about leading the academic enterprise of this extraordinary campus. It is truly what makes us a leader in the SUNY system and unique in the national and international realm of higher education. IGMAP was born of a vision held by Professor Nadia Rubaii to be an all-university initiative bringing people from many different disciplines together to contribute to a shared mission. People who had the skills to not just talk about or prevent or desire prevention, but who can actually manage the conversations and lessen the level of intensity when cycles of potential violence escalate. What brought her to the table was her expertise in the education of current and future government and nonprofit officials. Professor Max Pensky, professor of philosophy and a true partner in the Institute with Nadia, brought his interests in transnational justice and international law to bear. Looked at the turn from questions of post-atrocity justice and reconciliation to the prevention of future atrocities. Nadia and Max co-directed the Institute until Nadia's untimely death in March of 2022. Max continues in his co-director role now with Carrie Wiggum, Assistant Professor of Public Administration, as co-director. The Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize, in honor of the many contributions Rubaii made to the Institute and its mission, recognizes an individual whose work has made a real difference in the work of atrocity prevention understood in the broad sense that IGMAP uses. Protecting vulnerable persons and groups from state-sponsored violence, calling out for accountability and justice for those in power who abuse that power, and demanding that all people everywhere have an equal claim to safety, dignity, and respect. Tonight, the inaugural Rubaii Memorial Prize will be given to the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize recipient Maria Ressa, who embodies the values of courage, curiosity, and compassion that Nadia brought to her work as an international educator, devoted mentor, scholar, and activist. Thank you all for being here, and now I want to turn the podium over to my colleagues, Max and Carrie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Provost Hall, for that wonderful introduction. I'm Carrie Wiggum, co-director of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention here at Binghamton University. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Binghamton University resides on the ancestral territory of the Oneida and Onondaga nations, who continue to resist the ongoing nature of settler colonial genocide. I'd like to welcome all of you to this special evening as we remember our dear friend and colleague, Nadia Rubaii. I want especially to acknowledge that we're joined this evening by Nadia's sister, Muna, her mother, Sandy, her father, Mahdi, and his partner, Marsha. This evening, we celebrate the memory and legacy of Nadia by recognizing the remarkable achievements of journalist, activist, and author Maria Ressa. As a journalist for over 36 years, Ressa was CNN's bureau chief in Manila before opening and running its Jakarta bureau, where she became CNN's lead investigative reporter focusing on terrorism. In 2005, she headed the largest news organization in the Philippines, ABS-CBN, managing more than 1,000 journalists. In 2012, she co-founded the news site Rappler, where she is CEO. Within a year and a half, Rappler became one of the top news sites in the Philippines, and under Maria's leadership, it's now an indispensable and trusted source of reliable news and investigative journalism in the Philippines and beyond. Even before her Nobel Peace Prize recognition, Maria's defense of press freedom and her drive for accountability for the Philippines' political leadership led Time magazine to name her 2018 Person of the Year. It also listed her among its 100 most influential people of 2019 and its 100 most influential women of the century. She and her work were the subject of the 2021 PBS Frontline documentary, 1,000 Cuts. Of course, Maria also received a different kind of recognition from the Duterte regime. In 2019, the Philippine government filed 10 arrest warrants against her, followed by her arrest on multiple trumped-up charges. She was convicted of cyber libel in June 2020 for a story she didn't write, edit, or supervise at a time when the law she allegedly violated didn't exist. She joins us tonight on bail, pending her appeal, continuing her battle for press freedom, accountability, and an end to state-sponsored violence.
I'm Max Pensky, and along with Carrie, I'm the other co-director of IGMAP. Thank you all so much for being here. A very warm welcome to you all. Not long after Nadia's sudden death last March, we decided at IGMAP that it would be important to recognize somebody who best represented Nadia's commitment to the promotion of human rights and the prevention of genocide, mass atrocities, and all forms of identity-based violence. Someone whose work and courage have been inspirational for countless people around the world. But in fact, we never really spent very much time wondering whom we wanted to receive this first ever Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize. Even as we were discussing the idea, we knew that we wanted Maria to be the first recipient. Nadia and Maria had met via Zoom in 2019, as Nadia and I were researching the role of social media, and in particular Facebook, as a driver for the decay of democratic institutions in the Philippines. Shortly after, Maria accepted Nadia's invitation to a webinar on the role of investigative journalism in the age of online misinformation and disinformation. And Maria spoke passionately about the battle for democracy, about the respect for human rights and press freedom, not just in the Philippines, but in countries around the world experiencing democratic backsliding at the hands of autocratic political elites, often enabled by social media platforms. It was only about an hour or so after that webinar concluded that Maria was notified that she had won the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. Not just for her crusade against online misinformation, disinformation, and fake news, but for her courage in standing up to President Rodrigo Duterte's horrific attacks on some of the most vulnerable members of Filipino society.
Maria's work and advocacy have been effective and inspirational, not just in her own country, but in countries all around the world where democratic institutions and individual liberties are under assault by aspiring authoritarians, and where social media platforms, which promised to connect us all, so often divide us, making vulnerable groups even more vulnerable. Nadia's vision for IGMAP was that everyone, everywhere, had a contribution to make in the global effort to reduce the risks of identity-based violence, and that with enough courage, determination, compassion, and energy, individuals could make lasting, positive changes. No one embodies this more than Maria, and we are honored to recognize her and remember Nadia with this award. So please join me in welcoming Maria Ressa.
Thanks. Maria, on behalf of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention and of Binghamton University, we are deeply honored to present you with the inaugural Nadia Rubaii Memorial Prize.
Thank you. Thank you. My gosh. Thanks. So I have to tell you very quickly. I have you for an hour after. Nadia had invited me last year or 2 years ago for the conference last year, and I told her I couldn't come at that point because that little Nobel Prize got in the way. But she made me promise I would come to Binghamton, and I promised. And then when they came, I was like, yes. She's incredible. She was one of Rappler's first supporters at our worst moments. She would be waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, your time, to join our daylight webinars. So thank you. Thank you so much. They're taking my prize. Now I have you. Let me start by saying that I hope what you come out of the next few hour and a half or so is a resolve to go and act. And I'll show you what that means. The big words, what that IGMAP stands for, genocide and mass atrocity. It seems like that's out there, but let me show you how it begins with you in your pocket. Let me give you quick context for the Philippines. The Philippines spent, well, the one sentence I always use about colonial rule for the Philippines is that we spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. 300 years of Spanish colonial rule, and then American 50 years. We were America's first colony, I believe. It wasn't even called, there was no Philippine-American War. It was the Spanish-American War, where the Philippines was just handed over as a prize to America. That was really interesting when I was doing it. So think about it like that. Then the other thing that's important for you to know is that, like Burma or Myanmar, Facebook is our internet. We were one of the first adapters onto technology. We were first the texting capital of the world, SMS, and then we became the social media capital of the world. And for 6 years, until 2021, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. So think of us as a petri dish. Finally, the last one is about you today. The economy. In the conference today, we were talking about power and money. It is about power and money. So the first time that, let me go to the last time. It takes too long because I want to take you through. The last time human beings were commodified was around the age of industrialization, where it was human labor, right? We had the factory lines, and all of a sudden it was the age of the robber barons, the age of sweatshops, the age of child labor. And what happened? Governments came with the laws in place, and then those robber barons contributed tremendous amounts of money to education, maybe guilt. Today, human beings are commodified again, and this is why it's important for all of us. It's not labor this time, it's our attention. That attention economy allows insidious manipulation, because the end goal is not to teach you the end goal is to keep you scrolling. And one of the things that the tech companies have realized is that anger, fear, hate keeps you scrolling, right? The way to change what you think is by feeding you the worst emotions of humanity and, kind of like Inception, go in, change the way you feel, to change the way you think, to change the way you act. That all sounds really science fiction. Let me show you the data. All right, so here we go. Click. Hold on. You got to turn it on. So I'm just going to summarize the Nobel lecture in really 3 bullet points, right? I talked about how it is a person-to-person defense of democracy. Our last panel today in the conference was on Ukraine. And most Americans will think that, you know, there's a war out there, this war that was first seeded in 2014. But what we forget is in our pockets, the war is personal. Not only is that trying to vie for your attention, it is a war for facts, a war for values, a person-to-person defense of democracy. That was the first step. So the war today isn't out there. It's in your pocket. And one of the things that I started talking about was how by design, both the lies take root, become facts, and we tear down institutions. That's not just government, but news organizations. We tear it down, and I use a phrase that was first used by Osama bin Laden in pulling Al-Qaeda together, targeting America. He said, you know, it'll be death by 1,000 cuts. That's what we've lived through in the Philippines. That's what we are all living through, you know, and you barely notice it because you think, you know, cut. They're paper cuts, they're small cuts, you can weather it, but here you are bleeding to death, getting weaker each day. And I'll show you at the end of this time why this time matters and why we must act. Because genocide and atrocity, this is a downstream problem. Before that happens, there are many, many signals upstream. We need to go stop it at the furthest upstream we can before we're transformed, right? Okay, so death by 1,000 cuts. Finally, like I said, the war isn't out there. It's in your pocket. So one of the things that helped, and this is what I had written in my book, which was released in November, the end of November last year, we have to, every person, to win that battle, for that person-to-person battle, for facts, for integrity, for values, we have to embrace our fear. Embrace your fear. And it's a lesson I learned when I was really young as an immigrant kid coming to a public elementary school in Toms River, New Jersey. I was the shortest, only brown kid in the class. I could barely speak English. And I realized that you are your own worst enemy. Right? Whatever it is you're most afraid of, you have to touch it, hold it, embrace it. And that same lesson has kept me going against the attacks we've lived through since 2016. So if you embrace your fear, you take away what limits you. And I think that's part of what a community will help us do as well. But it's that resolve, right? So these were the things in the Nobel lecture, because in the end, we will win this battle, and it's not going to be one person. It's not going to be one institute. It will be all of us. Because here we go, and here I'm going to get very geeky. Nadia was very geeky. She asked to see all the data. So I'm going to show you some of them. It all began with data. An Excel sheet is easy to process with our human minds, right? But then big data came in. And when big data came in, it changed everything. It transformed it. And, you know, for all of us, I mean, when it was big data and it was the transformation of hotels, Airbnb, or Uber and Lyft, they were all things that were good for us. But when it became our information ecosystem, when it transformed our information ecosystem, it changed everything. I became a journalist because information is power. News organizations are gatekeepers. When I became a journalist, journalists were the most trusted profession. And what happened was, when our information ecosystem became corrupted, and it became corrupted by design, I'll show you this in the next slide, it affected everything else. It changed the values that drove the systems, and all of these cascading failures brought us to where we are today, right? So it starts with big data. The last thing is, let me bring it to AI, because that's the most recent thing that you'll be reading about. We've been dealing with rudimentary AI the first time through social media. So why don't we talk about that now? By design, these tech companies actually, and this was a 2018 MIT study, they spread lies faster than facts, at least 6 times. And if you pepper that with fear, anger, and hate, you win. Now, it's like you have a child, and you tell your child, lie, I'll reward you. Keep lying, I'll keep rewarding you. That fundamental corruption of distribution, of reach in our information ecosystem has led to the cascading failure of everything else. And I'll show you the impact globally when geopolitical power comes in and uses what was first an American, these are American companies, uses these advertising and marketing features to gain power, as have politicians, right? In each of our countries, that's what happened. This is part of how Duterte got elected. Why we have a second Marcos, the only son and namesake of the dictator we threw out in 1986 in a people power revolt, right? So imagine then that the design of our information ecosystem essentially turned it upside down. If lies are what you reward, there's no honesty. I mean, if you're Catholic, the 10 Commandments is thrown out, right? It affects our values. It affects everything else. So in order to be the greatest distribution you could have, you will incite fear, anger, hate, and lie. What kind of world do we live in, right? So it's like Netflix, you know, the Stranger Things. We're in the upside down. And the chances of mass atrocity, of genocide, has increased. And let me just mention 2 countries while we're talking of genocide. Myanmar, Burma, in 2018 had genocide. And both the United Nations and Facebook sent investigators there, and they both came back with the same result. Facebook enabled it. Other groups like IGMAP are warning of the potential for genocide in India, the world's largest democracy, moving into its own elections in 2024, right? Okay, let me pull it back. Sorry, lots of context. Let me pull it back now. So what has happened, and how, I told you I'd show you some data, right? This is what information operations, or in the case of America and its 2016 elections, it was straight out information warfare. And you were the target. We know 124 million American accounts were targeted by Russian disinformation. Black Lives Matter was targeted by Russian disinformation. And it wasn't about making you believe one thing, it was making you distrust everything. Both sides of Black Lives Matter was attacked. The end goal is not to, again, make you take a side. It's to tear society apart. Never before has a geopolitical power, another country trying to tear down another country, had access to the cellular level of democracy. You, right? So this is what we found in the Philippines. Rappler is essentially an alpha partner of Facebook. We knew Facebook better than Facebook did in our country because I started as a Facebook page in 2011. And in 2012, we rolled it out. But 2016 was when we felt the fundamental change. That was when, I'll show you what happened to me personally. I'll do micro, macro. In this one, what we pulled out was data, right? So think about it like this. If I were to look at every single person in this room, that would be like the content of the Facebook post. But if I were to pull up to maybe 20,000 feet, I would see that content in a pattern instead of seeing the individual post. This is what we did. This is called Shark Tank. And I want to show you how we showed our social media team how to respond to the attacks against us. Let's look at October 2016. This is when it turns red, it means that posts at least 10 times. And I want you to look at the Facebook post of Sally Matay. This is a Facebook page. This is all publicly available content, but just in data. And you can see that every single one, this is a cut and paste information operation, where you take the same idea, you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact, right? Nadia liked that one. Tim Snyder, who studied Ukraine, Hitler, who studied atrocities around the world and genocide, he said, if you want to rip the heart out of a democracy, you go after facts. That's what modern authoritarians do. So that's what they attacked, right? You say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. Step 1, you lie all the time. Step 2, you say it's your opponents and the journalists who lie. Step 3, everyone looks around and says, what's the truth? There is no truth. And then resistance is impossible and the game is over. By 2017, I started saying, we were in different parts of the world, but this is what we began seeing in the data. If you can make people believe lies are the facts, then you can control them. The reason you may not trust news organizations, the media you consume, traditional media, is because we have been under intense attack, one. The second reason is that the distribution of the news to you today is on social media platforms that has commodified the news and corrupted the incentive system for what kind of news we create in order to get the widest distribution. News organizations, journalists are not going to lie, right? We can't, but yet the worst journalism is getting the widest distribution, right? So think about that, about the news that you have. And the next time you say, I can't trust those journalists. The business model of news is dead. Advertising is dead because advertising can't stand up to micro-targeting. And let me talk about that a little bit. It really doesn't. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this up so that I can click through. Here's the global phenomenon. This is where I'll talk a little bit about the way the system works, right? In 2014, news organizations globally lost our distribution power. It used to be that we created the journalism, and we didn't call it content, we called it journalism, right? It has a set of standards and ethics. It holds power to account. It has a purpose and a mission. But by 2014, the distribution was taken over by technology, tech companies. And these tech companies didn't have the standards and ethics nor the mission of journalism. What they did have is a profit motive. And that profit motive, we didn't actually even have an idea. We didn't have a name for it because we lived our way into this, right? That profit motive, because they kept wanting you to stay and scroll, meant that lies spread faster than facts. A/B testing, right? They kind of hacked our biology. They figured out that if you're angry or you're afraid or you hate, then you will stay scrolling longer. That's Facebook. On YouTube, there's something called a clustering algorithm that recommends content to you, right? So there are different algorithms that are there. There's the friends of friends algorithm, which causes polarization. This is what happens when, in 2016, when Duterte was elected. If you were pro-Duterte, the friends of friends algorithm moved you further right. If you were anti-Duterte, you moved further left. 2017, 2018, 2019. It still continues, because that is how every social media platform grows. When you grow your network, they grow, right? Then the other one is the clustering algorithm, the vertical one. So we're polarized, and the other one is radicalization. And this happens if you're watching YouTube. They use a clustering algorithm, and this is a study by Harvard where they showed, they looked at Brazil. I mean, you know, you can replace Duterte with Trump. 2016 was a pivotal year. And then in Brazil, what they did is a Harvard team began to study Zika as a precursor to COVID. But what they saw, along with Zika, was how the fringe far-right Bolsonaro, they began to cluster, meaning to keep them scrolling. They began to cluster the fringe far-right with every conspiracy theorist that was there, people who would never have met each other in the real world. But they were clustered together, and the recommendation engine kept them scrolling that way. That became the support base for Bolsonaro, taking him to the presidency, and that became the support base that led to the violence on January 8th. This doesn't mirror reality, it is creating it by encouraging the worst of human nature. That's the world we're living in, right? So lies spread faster than facts. Finally, that last step is why? In the Nobel lecture, I talked about a behavior modification system. Two ways. The first is me, and I'll show this to you as a micro, right? If you are the target, the goal is not to, again, it's death by 1,000 cuts. What happened to me is I was just pounded with attacks. And those attacks, on one front, are meant to tear you down. They're very personal. I'll show you some of them. But on another front, the second step is it creates a bandwagon effect that tries to convince everyone else out there that the meta-narrative, journalist equals criminal, is right? I'll show you that as we move forward. What else do you need to know? Last, on tech, right? We talk a lot about content moderation. I was talking to some of the folks at the conference today about it at our planning, and content moderation is like a whack-a-mole game. I mean, more than that, think about it like this. Again, I like thinking of a river, right? So think about the river as being polluted. There's a factory putting pollution in this river, and that's a pollution. What's the pollution? Lies, right? So there's a factory spewing out lies, and it's polluting the entire river. Content moderation is like taking a glass, taking out the water, dropping like the carbon that will clean it up, and then dumping it back into the river, right? So Rappler is a fact-checking partner of Facebook, one of 2 Filipino fact-checking partners of Facebook. We do it because I like seeing the data, right? So you dump that back in. But this is where all 4 of the things that are treated separately all come together. The business model itself wasn't actually named until 2019. This is Shoshana Zuboff, wrote a 750-page book called Surveillance Capitalism. What's surveillance capitalism? If you post something on a platform, let's just take Facebook, right? Because 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. So I'm going to post something on Facebook, and machine learning will come in and take everything that you post and make a model of you, the model that knows you better than you know yourself. It has all your relationships. It has your fears. It has your joy, your joyful moments, right? And then what it does is AI comes in and scoops all of our models and makes it the motherlode database that is used for micro-targeting. The company says, because I used machine learning to make your model, I own your model. Replace the word model with clone, right? Uses machine learning to clone each of us, and then uses our clone to micro-target us. That's the behavior modification. It sells your weakest moment to a message to the highest bidder. It's kind of like you went to a psychiatrist. Max is my psychiatrist. I tell him my deepest, darkest secret. Then he goes out and says, I got Maria's secret. Who'll pay me the most? That's micro-targeting, right? The clone. But everything comes together. Antitrust, data privacy. I mean, somebody like Brittany Kaiser, the second Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, actually has a foundation called Own Your Data. In the Global South, where I come from, that's, if we were paid for our data, we would be able to live, or more like put 3 meals on the table, right? So data privacy, antitrust, user safety, and content moderation all the way downstream, right? The whack-a-mole game. That's the phenomenon. That's the world we live in with everything else. This is 2016. Let me show you what happened to me. So that's the macro. Let me bring you to the micro. This was in October 2016 when we began to realize, oh my God, we're being manipulated. We still didn't know what it was because it was real-time discovery, right? And this was when I wrote 2 of the 3 part of the weaponization of the internet series. And the one that I think this was the second piece, how Facebook algorithms impact democracy, was the first time that algorithms, let me define algorithms, opinion in code. Opinion in code. It's like taking one editor and replicating that editor 1 million times, right? The one I want you to look at is what my co-founder wrote. So these were the founders of Rappler that wrote our weaponization of the internet series. How this one, fake accounts, manufactured reality on social media. She and her team spent 3 months looking at these 26 accounts on Facebook. It was attacking every single major news organization. And we started putting everything on an Excel sheet because I didn't trust the machine. And we then assigned a reporter to look at everything these 26 accounts said about themselves, and we verified manually that they were all lies. They were what was called a sock puppet network, you know, like the sock puppet, right? So their sock puppet network. And then what we did is we spent months counting how many other Facebook accounts, these 26 fake accounts, were touching or influencing. It was at least 3 million other accounts. 26 fake accounts, impact. At least 3 million others. We came out with the pieces, And then immediately after they all came out, I was attacked with 90 hate messages per hour. And it just continued. I don't know, 90 hate messages per hour, again, that's just meant to pound you to silence. So what did we do? Let me show you some of it. I began to map it. Nadia liked the network maps as well. This was the first wave. By now, there's 18 waves, right? So it's been that long. But the first wave, the circles are Facebook accounts. The arrows show you their vectors. The sizes of the arrows are based on eigenvector centrality. And this was, all of these three, the main content creators, are affiliated with the Duterte administration. And they were so strategic that they were organized by demographic classes. So for the top 1%, the thinking class, it's this account down here that would create content. This is the network that attacked journalists, that attacked opposition politicians. This attacked the middle class. This is the mass-based account. An entertainer, a singer, who became a government official. Both of them were in Russia, a state visit to Moscow, when they started trying to trend #arrest Maria Ressa. These are some of the things that, I'd wake up to it and I'm like, oh, okay. Everything that is supposed to make you feel vulnerable. And that goes all the way to dehumanization, right? So the way I looked, the way I sounded, for a while, it took a while to get used to. This one, I have dry skin, so I have eczema. And when I was working for CNN, I was, you have to deal with the camera. But this was the first time where it was weaponized against me. So what they did is the photos, they doctored it so it looked much worse than it did. My skin is a lot better than that. But then they did things like this. The nickname they chose for me is Scrotum Face. And I woke up one day. So I can laugh now because it was a while back. But it was actually like, my mom was the one who said, what is this? It's meant to dehumanize. You study genocide and mass atrocity. When you dehumanize, it is the last step before violence. This is when I began to look at the data differently. And I saw that online violence is real-world violence. And I'll show you some of that. Let me just end with it doesn't stop. For every award, for every investigative series Rappler did, I would just, I'd just be punished for it. And you just sit there and you just go, okay. 1,000 Cuts, which was the PBS. Again, look, see, my skin is better than this. But, and you can even see, right? This is there. I asked Facebook to take this stuff down, and their only response is, but Maria, you're a public figure. That's wrong. I now know that, but I didn't know it then. But look how creative they are. The Scrotum Face still gets there, right? And somehow, there's nothing you can do at a certain point but keep going. But here's the thing. Oh, clicked it too fast. I'm not alone. And what we saw, and this was in 2021, the year that UNESCO gave me the World Press Freedom Prize, they also finally did a big data case study of the gendered disinformation women journalists were getting. Women, whether you're a journalist, a researcher, a politician, a public official, women get attacked more. In the Philippines in 2017, we counted the numbers at least 10 times more than men. And because we had a misogynistic president, the sexism and the misogyny increased. Essentially, President Duterte gave our society permission to be their worst selves. And it was always there underneath, right? We've had 2 women presidents in the Philippines. But up until 2014, we did a survey in 2014, where we asked people in NCR, the National Capital Region, if you had a man and a woman and they had equal qualifications, who would you hire? And the survey came back, 71% said they would hire the man, right? So this was embedded. This was kind of, it takes time to change. But then what happened, when lies, hate, when our president gave permission, it became much worse. Let me show you some of the data that they did find in UNESCO. So this is America, this is globally. 73% of women journalists that were surveyed experienced online abuse. This is International Center for Journalists and UNESCO. 25% of that received threats of physical violence, and of that, 20% turned into real-world violence. So what did that mean for me in Rappler? In 2016, I increased security. Rappler is about 100 people, 63% female, not by design. If you're a guy, you want to come work for us, come. But our median age is 23 years old. So when the attacks came at us, I increased security. You can't take the risk. By 2018, I had increased security 6 times. This was a big data case study of the attacks against me, and you can see 60% was meant to tear down my credibility. It didn't work. But they tried, and for a sector of society who did believe it, they think I'm a criminal, all these words that are there. 40% was meant to tear down my spirit. If you are going to do public advocacy, be prepared. It will challenge you in far more personal ways than we ever have if nothing is done to social media today. And did I mention? Oh, I was going to tell you about AI. What happened first was that AI in social media already turned the world crazy. Now we have a far more sophisticated AI, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Let me keep going. Let me bring you to politics, yours. This is the election integrity partnership of the kind of conspiracy theory of the election fraud, right? Stop the steal. This shows you the same exact thing that we lived through in the Philippines, that it roughly takes a year when the meta-narrative is seeded, right? It was seeded, stop the steal, or what was it called? The big lie? You had, right? August 20th, 2019, the earliest op-ed on RT, Russia Today. And then the earliest domestic piece was December 22nd, 2019. That was the meta-narrative being introduced. The mainstreaming happened with Steve Bannon on YouTube. Steve Bannon was behind Cambridge Analytica. You know, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Americans had the most number of data that was manipulated, but the country with the second most number of compromised accounts was your petri dish, the Philippines. I laugh. Anyway, Tucker Carlson then moves it here in September 2020, so we're already a year later. And then QAnon drops it October 7th. President Trump says it in November. And where does this lead to? The violence on Capitol Hill, the first time ever. Is that a mass atrocity? This is where I would go, I would take the class. So this is, the same thing happened to me, right? Like bottom up in 2016, the meta-narrative is journalist equals criminal, targeting me. And then a year later, President Duterte comes top down, journalist equals criminal. He says it in his State of the Nation address. And then a week later, I get my first subpoena. And then I just kept getting, in 2018, we had our first shutdown order, 14 investigations in 2019. Oh yeah, we didn't shut down, we just kept going. So you don't pay attention if it's unconstitutional. So we're still fighting it. In 2019, I I kept getting arrested every 6 weeks. 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years, and then 2020 I was convicted. I can't say it right now because I have restrictions when I travel. I cannot speak about the cyber libel case, which is already at the Supreme Court, which has given me permission to be here today. And then finally, here's the upside. I'm not going to depress you, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move to solutions. The upside is, from 2019 to today, 7 of the 10 cases are gone. In fact, on January 18th, I had to go to court, and I woke up and I psyched myself to be prepared to go to jail for 34 years. Because embrace your fear, right? And I was thrilled when we were acquitted, Rappler and I. And I didn't know what to do, because in many ways, when you've been under attack for so long, you're prepared for the bad news. You're not so prepared for the good news. But 34 years disappeared like that. It just took 4 years and 2 months of time and money, right? I mean, let me keep going, and I will take you through the last part. This is where we are on geopolitical. So micro, we're back to macro. Social media for information warfare. What happened to America is information warfare. Russia first experimented with information warfare in Crimea in 2014, seeding the meta-narrative that led to the annexation of Crimea and was used again in February 2022 for Russia to invade Ukraine itself. Right? You were targeted 2016, 2017. It doesn't stop, right? And there are 3 layers of this behavior modification. If you do not believe anything, that's the first step. If you have lost trust in everything, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you the 3 sentences that I've been saying over and over and over since 2016. I said it in the Nobel lecture. Remember, lies spread faster than facts. So if we have no facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we have no shared reality. We cannot have democracy. We cannot solve any problem, including the existential ones like climate change. I was just on Tuesday with Al Gore, and he came out and he nicely said, we have to solve Maria's problems first before we can solve climate change. If we don't have a shared reality, we cannot move forward. Last thing for you to think about on this shared reality, right? In 2014, when the tech companies were saying everyone will have their own personalized feed, as a journalist, I thought, how is that possible? Who's the agenda, news-setting agenda of the day? And I thought, maybe I'm just old. But then, you know what happens when everyone in this room has their own separate reality? This is called an insane asylum. We cannot live in a world like this, right? So what does that mean? I just want to show you the layers that it's impacted humanity, right? So the first layer of this behavior modification system is personal. You change. So not only are you addicted, if you want to know more about the addictive parts, because I didn't spend much time on it here, Dopamine Nation by, I think it's Alice Lamke. She's a medical doctor in Stanford. She wrote about how we are addicted. And I worry about this generation. Yes, you're more discerning, but you also distrust and are far more cynical than I was, than my generation, right? So we just have to be aware. So the first is personal, right? So we change cognitive biases. It's so easy to play with our biology. And the next group of organizations, countries that did not actually do what they were supposed to do are the democratic nations that were supposed to protect us, like the Better Business Bureau, right? If tech abdicated responsibility for protecting our shared space, the public sphere, what about those democratic governments like the United States? These were first American companies. I notice you act on TikTok, but You act on TikTok, you should act on your own, our own. I'm Filipino American. So we should act on this, right? We should not be insidiously manipulated by information operations, because this is literally changing who we are. It is harming us. And the next level is sociological. We behave differently in groups when mobs are incited, when hate and fear is the driving force. In the Nobel lecture, I called it toxic sludge. We change as people. And for those of my generation, I remember this cartoon where there's you're dealing with your conscience, and there's a devil on your shoulder, and on your left shoulder there's the angel. And you want to do something, the devil is saying, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. The angel is saying, no, don't do it. That would be hurtful to someone. You're not being fair. It's bad. The design of social media has gagged the angel and flicked it off your shoulder, and it's grown the devil and given it a megaphone directly into your nervous system. So that means what? At a sociological level, I lived through the mobs in Indonesia, the fall of Suharto. It was like opening Pandora's box. Every week, I would be going from city to city to city. It would be ethnic violence, religious violence, political violence. It was mob rule. A mob is made up of very nice people. So that is the sociological. We all know the sociological studies, right? Milgram studies, the conformity studies. These are from the 60s. The Milgram study, the Milgram study was interesting because if you have permission to act like a monster, what he proved is that you would. You know that experiment? You do. All right. Last one, and not much is written about this. Emergent human behavior. So sociological and emergent human behavior is far, far more. It is our evolution. If our attention span has shifted from when I was a broadcast journalist, it was 10 seconds. Now it's down to 3 seconds, the attention span of a goldfish. If we are constantly rewarded, if the plasticity of our brains, if our brains are literally being rewired and our emotions are being pushed in ways that encourage the worst of who we are, how do we evolve as a species? These are some of the things that are there, right? So I'm still telling you the bad. I haven't told you the good yet. You should tell me when I should shut up. But let me go to the last one, the last 2 minutes in the game of democracy. Between January this year and 2024, there will be 90 elections around the world. If you do not have integrity of facts, you cannot have integrity of elections, right? Think about that. How do you know who to vote for? How do you know who to believe if you don't know? So what's going to determine that? Tribe. When was the last time we behaved? Tribalism ruled. We have been there before. And I will say, like, what's interesting in the panel this morning, Germany, it reminded me Germany took responsibility and embedded this in their history, and yet we have the rise of the far right and Nazism again, right? So this is within Germany. So think about this again, right? So, okay, let me go back. So what's happened globally? More and more illiberal leaders are being elected democratically. Populists, digital populists in particular, ones who use power, this type of power, to insidiously manipulate us. It's not just warfare, it's also political power. They're elected illiberally. I know this from the Philippines, illiberal leaders. And what they do is they crumble institutions of democracy in their own countries. But they don't stay in their countries. They also ally together. So think about, Anne Applebaum calls it autocracy, Inc. I call it kleptocracy, Inc. Because we'll see again, right? We can see the patterns, but think about this. Would Belarus be a democracy today if Russia didn't help? Yes. Would, there's so many more. Last two stats, this is the VDEM report that just came out. In 2022, they said that 60% of the world is now living under autocratic rule. A year later, this year, this January in 2023, that number has increased to 72% of the world. That's a huge jump in a year, right? And here's the other part. We are now at a point where the quality of our democracy has been rolled back to 1986 levels globally. But in Asia Pacific, where I come from, it's been rolled back to 1978 levels. The quality of governance is critically important to deal with the problems the Institute outlines, right? To deal with upscale. Okay, there's a geopolitical. I give you such good news. Let's move forward, and how do we deal with this? I want to just bring you to the Philippines. There's still more time. I'm going to take just a little bit more because I know I want to give you questions. Nadia liked this one too. I'm giving you the greatest hits that Nadia. This was my Twitter account. And I want to show it to you because after the Nobel Prize, of course the attacks started again, and that's what this spike is. So I came back to the Philippines after I received the Nobel, and there were these attacks on Twitter. My team just pulled it out, and then we did two things. We just took a look at when the accounts were created. This is very simple, right? And you can see that most of the accounts that were attacking me were pro-Marcos accounts. So little sidebar, history, 1986, Ferdinand Marcos, the father, was kind of the first kleptocrat around the world that the Swiss banks stopped their secrecy laws, gave the information because the family had stolen at least $10 billion by 1986 accounts. So now his only son and namesake, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., wins as president in May 2022 elections using information operations. And that's a sidebar. Let me bring you back here. So what happened to the account, right? Well, then we put the Marcos creation dates along with the anti-Marcos, which is Laban, or Laban Marcos is fight Marcos. It's actually pro-Marcos hashtag. Then the disqualify Marcos was the anti-Marcos hashtag. This is the gray anti-Marcos hashtags. That's what normal accounts creation should look like. You notice both of them had a bit of a spike here, but this spike was beyond. So we did a story. Marcos Network tries to take over Twitter with freshly made accounts. And then in just a few days, Twitter took it down. Of course, Twitter's different now also, right? You know, NPR. Anyway, so here's how it was seeded, the same way that, well, I won't talk about your politics, but the narratives were seeded, we mapped it, the fan pages activated, history was changed in front of our eyes. For mass atrocity and genocide, think about it like this. The Milan Kundera quote from The Unbearable Lightness of Being, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. These tech companies can make us forget. Well, they don't do it. They enable it, right? Okay, so we now believe in the golden age, and you can see again, we just looked at numbers and the golden age of Marcos. This is how Marcos was elected. Okay, I told you I wasn't going to leave you with the worst things, and I want you to walk out of here empowered to do something, knowing that we are on the cusp. This is it, right? In the 90 elections, by 2024, 3 critical elections globally. It will be Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population. It anchors Southeast Asia, India, the world's largest democracy, and the United States. What are you guys going to do? Let me show you what we did, and I think you can try some of this. We keep throwing spaghetti against the wall because we have no choice. It's survival for us, right? And, you know, my lawyers in the beginning of 2016 told me that I was foolish to stand up, to fight for what's right. But I think what I've learned in this entire time is doing the right thing is the right thing, even when we live in the upside down, right? Okay, so here are our 3 pillars for Rappler. Technology. Use technology. How do we do that, right? So for me, it's technology, journalism, and community. And Rappler stands in the middle. You are the community. Let me show you what we've been working on. So this is the community part. Actually, let me pull it back. Let me show you this one. So technology is, first, let's put some guardrails on tech, right? The long term is education. The medium term is legislation. The short term is just us. We have to become citizens, not consumers, not users of these tech companies, right? We need to hold them as accountable as we hold our governments. Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, said that to get a toaster in your house, that toaster has to pass more regulations than the social media companies that actually you hold in your pocket, and that is a behavior modification system. So that's technology. Rappler's also building its own platform. It's part of the reason every day I look at new code. And then the second thing of journalism. Those poor journalists, right? And I'll show you what I mean when we did a whole of society experiment. But the journalists, there's no way that independent journalism is going to survive. And so what we did in 2019 was we created the International Fund for Public Interest Media. This is outside the Philippines. I co-chair this along with the former president of the New York Times. He's also the former director general of the BBC, Mark Thompson. Last year, we raised $50 million from democratic nations. So this is fresh money, ODA. Because right now, in 2019, overseas development assistance was only, for journalists, was only 0.3%. So we want to just raise it to 1%. That will give $1 billion every year for independent media. And with a focus on the Global South, we've started giving out the grants, 11 of them this year. We just announced it 2 weeks ago, right? So that's the journalism. Now I bring you to community, which is where you are. Unless you want to be a journalist, which there is no better time, by the way. I'll tell you about that later. All right, so this is called a facts first PH pyramid. We were supposed to begin building this 4-layer pyramid. So what is it, right? This was something we did, funded with the help of the Google News Initiative, right? Okay, I came to them with an idea. I was like, we need a whole of society approach to protect the facts. Then I began calling it an influencer marketing campaign for facts, right? And you can't just do this organizing. You must do it with data, right? So we used the Midan, which is a San Francisco startup, to help create a database. And look at the 4 layers that we played with. Fact-checking, layer 1, 16 news organizations that used to compete with each other. So this is the first time we all ever worked together. And each one of those news groups had a quota, a KPI. They needed to churn out a specific number of fact checks. And, you know, fact checks don't spread on social media, right? So that led to the second layer we called the mesh. So that's about 116 civil society groups, NGOs, student organizations. Business finally came in. The church came in. And their instructions was very simple. Share these fact checks, but add emotion. and you can't use anger. And what we found out was that inspiration spreads as fast as anger. I have the data, and I wish I could show Nadia that. It was fascinating. We were able to take over the center of the Facebook information ecosystem. It's too late. I mean, Marcos had started information operations in 2014. But let me finish the last two layers, and then we can go to questions. Research groups, the academic research groups, we took that data pipeline, processed the data for them, and gave it to them. And then every week we had a different academic institution talking about what were the lies that were being fed, who was being attacked, and then we opened it up to the public. These articles are now being peer reviewed, right? Some of them, because we kind of turned it upside down. We said, it's so important for the public to know this right now from experts. So please do it before you submit to peer review. So they stopped writing like academics and wrote a little bit more for the public. And it was something that our voting, especially our young voters, looked for every week. Finally, the last one, which was critical. How can you have rule of law if you don't have facts? Legal groups in the Philippines from the left and the right came together, and in 3 months, they filed more than 20 cases to protect the pyramid, right? Most of the, here's the funny story. Every time we had a get-together, the lawyers were so gung-ho and so excited and so energized. The journalists would drink their beer because they were so exhausted. It worked, though, and we're still continuing this. I don't know, we have to figure out a whole of society approach in the absence of legislation. You know, I spent a lot of last year working with the EU because this isn't a freedom of speech issue. That's the other thing you hear a lot from the tech lobby, and you hear it mimicked. This is a freedom of reach issue. And that's a quote from a comedian who said that, but that's a fact. It's about distribution. It's about how something reaches you, right? Why should lies have preferential treatment? Who benefits? So let me end it there with this. Most of this, I think, is in the book that came out at the end of November. But I turn it around and give it back to you, which is, you know, in the end, this is it. 2024, that's like not that far away, right? Like next year. It's part of the reason I'm chasing my shadow. We must do something now. It's now. So we'll see, right? You get what you give. So, what will you sacrifice for the truth? Thanks.
So, hi everyone, I'm over here on the side. Thank you so much, Maria, for that amazing talk. I guess I'll get down here in my light. We're now gonna open it up to questions. So if you have a question, please make your way over here to the microphone. In the meantime, I'll take prerogative of the moderator and ask the first question. One metaphor, and so other people should be coming up now. One metaphor that you used in your talk was about the factory spewing out pollution and the need to go upstream. And that's a metaphor that we use a lot in atrocity prevention too, the need to start looking, not focusing on places where mass killing is already taking place,
Right.
but looking far upstream. One thing I think challenge with that is that with both traditional journalism and social media, there's a tendency to focus on crisis.
Yep.
And focus on places where the most horrific things are already taking place. What do you think needs to change for media, both traditional and social media, to allow us to focus more on those early stages when there's much more opportunity to intervene and prevent things from escalating to that point?
Wow, it's a great question, but it's actually a revamp of our entire system, right? So let's move away from mass atrocity and just go to the greatest problems the world is facing, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We actually decided globally we were going to give it until 2030, and now Secretary General, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I think, is calling for an emergency. There's no way we will hit the climate targets nor the targets for the SDGs, right? So to go to what you were saying, this is a time of creative destruction, right? To use that financial term. Everything has been destroyed. You are coming of age at a time when we're in the upside down, so it's deceptively familiar, but you're gonna have to like tear out the moss and you're gonna have to rebuild. But that's an opportunity, right? That's an opportunity to actually build better. This is how I ended the Nobel lecture, because I can't depress you. I'm not depressed, although I'm really scared with AI right now, because it's essentially been released to the public. It's like releasing a drug, and I'm going to say, hey, you guys here on this side, you're going to take drug A, and you guys, I'm going to give you drug B. Testing in real time with real people. That's what we're doing with AI. More sophisticated than we've ever had. And then, oh, drug A, you people died. I'm so sorry. Which is actually what happened with AI in social media, right? We haven't learned our lesson. We're releasing it in the wild again, i.e., in the public square. To answer your question on what we can do right now is, this institute is a lone voice in so many ways, right? But you are pulling together groups of people. This is a time to organize, and to organize in completely new ways, I think. We have to know the past. If we don't know the past, we'll keep repeating the mistakes of the past. And now, the information warfare is meant to make you forget the past, because then if you don't know it, you can't fight it. Right? So I know you have a difficult time as teachers to talk about white replacement theory. I don't. So let me talk about it very quickly. In Hungary, Viktor Orban has put white replacement theory as part of state ideology. This is the movement of the world towards fascism, right? And CPAC, for 2 years in a row, has brought Orban in, has brought these ideas to America. He was their star speaker. So the question, I guess, for you is, you are going to have to define who you are. First, as a person. In Rappler, I always talk about, you draw the lines. On this side, you're good. This side, you're evil. That's our values. Sorry, I keep answering your question in between. I will say two things about journalism. The business model is dead, advertising. And almost every major news organization has had to lay off people. America has never seen so many journalists laid off. I talked to 3 young journalists today, and it's bleak, but that's also opportunity. Because there's no other profession that stands up to power, is trained to stand up to power, than journalists. And I'll tell you about my reporter, Pia Renada. My task was to just hold up the sky, right? To kind of absorb the blows coming from the government. But it was my young reporters who actually faced Duterte in the palace. In 1,000 Cuts, you will see Duterte attacking her, taking the mic away from her. And she, even though you could hear her voice shake, stood her ground. She's 26 years old, right? So this is a time that is challenging for individual journalists and for news organizations. We need to find a sustainable business model. But here's the lesson I've learned. Nietzsche was right. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I learned that, and Rappler learned that. We found a sustainable business model that is not advertising.
Thank you so much for your words today. A lot to take in, and it's just
Sorry, was it too much?
no, not at all. Not at all. Very rich.
I'm sorry if I
Just
was rambling.
very good for us for me personally, it was eye-opening. I don't consider the thoughts that you've put forward as often as I should. I've recently been interested in how hate and oppression gets baked into our algorithms. So
Yes.
recently I came across a book called Algorithms of Oppression by a woman named Sophia Umoja Noble.
I know her. Yes,
Okay.
she's great.
So, and her lens is the lens of racism. You can also apply it to many other isms.
Yep.
But so in the book it says oppression operates in the same formats, runs the same scripts over and over. It is tweaked to be content specific, but it's all the same source code. And I wonder if you could just speak to how oppression is getting baked in. Is it too late? Technological redlining, not only hate, but also algorithms that then remove opportunities and these kinds of things that are happening now in a digital space.
No, you're absolutely correct. Thank you for the question. Sophia Noble also talked about the flattening of meaning, right? Which is a problem we have right now, because what happens when one word means different things? To respond to what you said, you guys seen the film Coded Bias? If you haven't yet, I recommend Coded Bias. It's a film that was in Sundance the same time as Frontline, right before the pandemic lockdown. And Coded Bias follows an MIT student, a woman named Joy, with a last name I can never pronounce. But Joy is Canadian-Kenyan. And she was in MIT, and she was taking an AI class. And so they were supposed to open the program, and then their face would be read by the AI. But because she was a black woman, the only way she could do the assignment is if she put a white face on. Coded bias, right? This is there. So let me go to what solutions can we do, right? In September last year, Dmitry Muratov, the Russian journalist who we won the Nobel Peace, we were given the Nobel Peace Prize together in 2021. He, along with a dozen other Nobel laureates and about 100 different organizations, civil society, in Oslo, we launched what we call the 10-point action plan, which falls into 3 buckets. This is how bad the US is, guys. You have to do something about this. 6 of the 10 points were addressed to the EU, because the EU's Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act at least addresses the problem, which is algorithms, the bias of algorithms, and the impunity of algorithms, right? Because you have to talk impunity. In my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, well, Elon wasn't there yet. So Mark Zuckerberg is a bigger dictator than Rodrigo Duterte, right? Covers more of the world. What we did in Norway in September last year is the 10-point action plan dissolves into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is stop surveillance for profit. No one should clone us, and if they did, we own our clones. We should be notified. The second is to stop coded bias, because it is baked into the algorithms that are governing your lives in ways you do not know. And if you are LGBTQ+, if you are marginalized in the real world, you are further marginalized online. If you read Weapons of Math Destruction, she talks about how a public school decided to use algorithms and actually then made a huge error for a lot more students, right? The errors of the coded bias is generational. It's the impact of a Duterte on the Philippines here. Third, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. because only journalists are foolish enough to stand up to power and get hammered down. So the quick answer to your question is, it is what exists today. We must demand better. And so, this pyramid that we did. So think about it as a timeline, right? Long-term, medium-term, short-term. I run ops. And so I hate don't get too mired in the tactics without the strategic goal. We must get our rights back. There should be human rights goals. But I will say one thing, right, that's connected to the hate that's there. Part of the reason that identity politics has become such a flashpoint is because that was also attacked by information warfare in Black Lives Matter, for example, of Russia, right? So please, actually, I can show you 2 more slides of lessons here, but please, if you feel angry, chill. Like, don't share. Empathy works really well. Step into. It's a tough time, and we will not win if we keep letting our amygdala dictate our thoughts, our actions.
Good evening, Maria. Thank you very much for your outstanding lecture. Actually, I have so many questions too, because I'm working with Russian propaganda, basically as a lawyer, on the question of incitement to genocide.
Yes.
So probably the main question that I would like to ask you is about the results and the changes from 2016 until now, because Facebook and basically Twitter and YouTube and Google, they played such a huge role in the atrocity that were going on around. And again, like the Trump's election,
right.
This is something very important that has happened. So I guess that there was the reaction from civil society and from the lawyers on everything of that. And as far as I know, basically from the books, that Facebook was reacting quite modest,
yes.
Still oriented on the business than on combating atrocities. So what was the reaction? What were the changes like of Facebook, of probably Twitter since 2016? Like how they were reacting on the situation and how they changed their policy?
Not enough. Not enough, right? Has anyone been held liable for the genocide in Myanmar? Has anyone been held liable for the 2016 elections? Either Russia or the tech companies, right? I want to share with you this quote by Yuri Andropov. I'm sure you know this quote. He's the former KGB chairman. He said, "Disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become a changed person." We've been taking cocaine all the time. That's what social media has enabled. And the longer we take to put these guardrails in place, the weaker we become. That's partly connected to the death by 1,000 cuts, right? So disinformation, and please use the word disinformation, not misinformation. That's partly part of the $70 million tech lobby in the United States. The real crucial part is to stop the insidious manipulation, the targeted manipulation. And I can name several of these countries now. It's not Russia alone. China joined soon after. We have the data for that now. You have Iran. It's so interesting, right? As the UN dithers, I'm one of 10 people who advise. It's called the Leadership Panel to the UN Secretary General for the Internet Governance Forum. We need to move faster. Sometimes, I shouldn't say these things. Why not? Sometimes I can fall asleep in a meeting and I will wake up and nothing has happened. We don't have time to waste. So back to what the tech platforms are doing, they have convinced me, and I still work with them, because I'm not against it. I am for tech. We will never be able to put the genie back in the bottle. That is where they're right. But what we can stop is the profit at all costs. The harms for our society is documented. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, released more than 10,000 internal Facebook documents that showed that young women on Instagram have higher incidence of eating disorders, that showed that teenagers are more depressed, right? I mean, the harms are so clear. And that's not even taking into account information operations. I would say this is information operations against me, although I guess what's the difference between warfare and operations, right? It weakens democracy at the cellular level. If you're being manipulated, how are you going to vote well, right? We go back to, do we have agency? So your question, how are we going to bake that in? It moves faster now. How do we do that if we're being manipulated? So I would say stop the manipulation. Actually, those three buckets. Stop surveillance for profit, stop coded bias, and journalism as an antidote to tyranny. Let's chat tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Sam. I just want to say it was a great lecture, very interesting, learned a lot. As someone with a computer science background, I was very curious about the role of AI. You spoke on the fact that lies spread faster with AI than truth. That's definitely a problem, of course, but by the same metric, couldn't AI be trained to remove lies faster than they're put up, or at least at the same rate that they're put up, so that it's combated?
I love it. Thank you. And I hope you work on this, right? So let's talk about AI. This is how fast it's moving. Because they are also, engineers are throwing spaghetti against the wall. And they're getting to experiment on us in real time. So think about how fast. Just let's do OpenAI, since that's the group that first released the chatbot. GPT-2, which is the first LLM, the second LLM that was trained. The way it works, if you're not familiar with it, right, is it thinks, it's like a human mind. When it's writing something, it goes word for word for word, right? It fills in. Except the parameters in GPT-2 was 1.5 billion. So it would go, like imagine a human brain going through 1.5 parameters. GPT-3, which is not where we are yet, GPT-3 has turned the 1.5 billion to 175 billion. That's exponential. GPT-4, which was just released a few weeks ago, hasn't told us how many parameters it is, right? So the biggest problems I have with AI right now is that these tech companies are making decisions without supervision. You know, question if you're a publisher or if you publish a book and that's fed into the AI, should you be given anything? Like we used to have copyright laws. The second question, if you're throwing in all of social media, right? Social media prioritizes the spread of lies. So you're actually teaching the AI to lie as well. The coded bias that is in the unstructured data is built into that AI, right? Here's the part I love the best. Sam Altman actually says, you know, they give you all the warnings, whether it's Microsoft Bing or whether it's Sam in his interviews. He'll always say this is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I always wonder, man, if it's so dangerous, why are you releasing it, right? Let me answer your question. Can we actually? Yes, we can. Let me tell you what we're doing. In May 2022, in Rappler, we used GPT-3, but it's not going to make us a lot of money, but it does do different things, right? So GPT-3 we used because in May 2022, we had 18,000 simultaneous elections in the Philippines. I wanted to have a biography for every single candidate on the Rappler page. I only have 10 reporters. 10. So we had GPT-3 create 50,000 pages. We fed it the data. It spewed out biography pages of all the candidates. except that we clearly labeled this page is created with OpenAI GPT-3 and checked by Rappler Research, right? So the data's clear. Now we're looking at building. What are we putting in? What are we feeding this AI? Because garbage in is garbage out. And unstructured big data of social media is garbage, right? They include it. Would you even include Wikipedia? There are lots of ethical problems, like right now when we're building our AI, we're putting Rappler content in it because I know it's fact-based, it's evidence-based, right? But do you put Wikipedia in? There is a Creative Commons license, so you could, kind of. But one of our internal questions is, do we put in other news organizations? And we opted not to unless we ask them for permission. That's like called standards and ethics. So my question to you as an engineer, why don't engineers think like that?
That's a bit above my pay grade.
No, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I just realized I also didn't answer your question. Could we train it to find the lies? Well, we first have to give it a large enough data set that shows what the lies are, right? But the problem is facts are very situational, right? Like we know here, I can say, how many people are in this room. That's a fact. The interpretation of that becomes something else. So it goes back to the glass half empty, half full. Maybe I'd love to hear from an engineer how we could, because there's tons of things we could do with it. It's just scary as all heck right now, and there are no safeguards. Please be empowered American citizens and do something about it.
I think in part to answer your question, though, I think it's a function of how computer science and computer engineering is taught.
Yes.
In that, I know at least the Binghamton curriculum for computer science, they are mandated to take an ethics class, but it's only one semester. The amount of ethical learning is limited. And at the end of the day, as an engineer or software developer, you would knowingly be taking money away from yourself. So there's no incentivization to do that, I think, for a lot of people.
Thank you. It is the incentive structure, right? And that's the problem. So, and that's what's led to the upside down. We build tech, we use agile development, and always it boggles my mind, because what engineers look at is they're looking at the granular level. Like, so journalists will look at, what's the macro level, but when you're building something, you actually need the number of cement, so it's very different. But what I see all the time is if you leave engineers alone, they will tick off and make choices in the coding that actually brings harms.
Great. I'm so sorry that we can't answer, Maria can't get to everyone's questions. We're out of time for this evening, but please join me in thanking Maria Ressa for joining us in Binghamton.
Thank you. Thank you.